Welcome to Sleep Stories and Rain, where the veil between worlds is thinner than you think. Tonight, we summon the most disturbing true Ouija horror stories, encounters that began with innocent curiosity and ended in chilling terror. These tales will make you question every whisper and shadow. Only 50% of viewers are subscribed, so if you crave true accounts of supernatural dread, hit subscribe now and join our fearless community. Share your own Ouija board experiences in the comments. Messages from beyond, sinister warnings, or nights that haunted you forever. Your stories fuel our nightmares. Dim the lights, steady your nerves, and prepare for our first terrifying encounter.
I still wake up in cold sweats, remembering the night we found that Ouija board in my grandmother's attic. It was 3 months after her funeral, and my cousin Jake and I were cleaning out her house before the estate sale. The board was tucked behind a dusty trunk, wrapped in black velvet like some precious relic. The moment I touched it, my fingers went numb with cold. Jake laughed when I told him about the chill. He was always the skeptic, the one who needed proof of everything. "Come on, Sarah," he said, unwrapping the ornate wooden board. "It's just a game. What's the worst that could happen?" The planchette was made of tarnished silver, heavier than it should have been, and when Jake set it on the board, it immediately began to vibrate. We decided to try it that night. I know now we should have left it in that attic, should have burned it with the rest of Grandma's things. But curiosity killed more than just cats. We lit candles in the living room and placed our fingers on the planchette. "Is anyone there?" Jake asked, his voice mocking and theatrical. The response was immediate. The planchette shot across the board so fast our fingers could barely keep up. The board spelled out, "Finally." My heart hammered against my ribs. Jake's smirk faded as we watched the piece move again without either of us pushing it. "Who speaks?" it spelled. "We're Sarah and Jake," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Who are you?" The planchette circled the board 3 times before settling. "Mordecai Thorne, I have been waiting." Jake tried to pull his hands away, but they seemed glued to the planchette. "This is impossible," he muttered, but his face had gone pale. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly we could see our breath. "Waiting for what?" I asked, though every instinct screamed at me to stop. "For you to open the door." Before we could ask what door, every candle in the room flickered. The shadows on the walls began moving independently, stretching and writhing like living things. The planchette moved again, faster now, almost violent in its urgency. "She told me you would come. Your grandmother promised." My blood turned to ice. Grandma had always been strange about the supernatural, warning us away from seances and spiritboards. Now I understood why. "What did she promise?" I asked. "Exchange. Her soul for yours. Debt must be paid." The house began to shake. Pictures fell from the walls, and the windows rattled in their frames. Through the chaos, we heard footsteps upstairs, slow, deliberate steps that couldn't belong to anyone living. The ceiling creaked under an impossible weight. "We need to say goodbye," Jake shouted over the noise. "You have to say goodbye to end the session." But when we tried to move the planchette to goodbye, it fought us. The silver piece burned our fingers, yet we couldn't let go. The board spelled out message after message: "No escape, door is open, I am here." That's when we saw him. Mordecai Thorne materialized at the bottom of the stairs, and he was everything nightmares were made of. His face was a ruin of rotted flesh hanging from visible bone. His clothes were the tattered remains of what might have been a Victorian suit, and his eyes... God, his eyes were black holes that seemed to swallow light. When he smiled, rows of broken teeth gleamed yellow in the candlelight. "The old woman kept her word," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "Fresh souls to replace what was taken." Jake finally managed to tear his hands from the planchette and grabbed a candle. "Stay back," he yelled, holding the flame toward the apparition. Thorne laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and the candle flame turned black. I don't remember much of what happened next. I know Jake screamed. I know the temperature dropped until frost formed on the windows. I know Thorne reached for us with fingers that were too long, too sharp. And I know that somehow, in the chaos, I managed to flip the board over. The silence that followed was deafening. When the police found us the next morning, Jake was catatonic. He spent 6 months in a psychiatric facility and still won't talk about that night. The coroner said he'd had some kind of seizure, that the stress had caused a mental break. But I know what really happened. I burned the Ouija board in Grandma's backyard before the cops arrived. As it caught fire, I swear I heard Thorns screaming from somewhere far away. The flames turned green, then purple, then black, before finally dying to normal orange. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel that cold numbness in my fingers. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear footsteps that don't belong to anyone living. Mordecai Thorne is still out there, still waiting. The door may be closed, but I don't think it's locked.
The Ouija board cost me $3 at a garage sale, and I thought I was getting the deal of a lifetime. What I actually bought was a one-way ticket to hell. It happened 6 months ago, but I still wake up screaming. My name is Jake, and I'm 22 years old. Before that night, I didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural. I was a college student studying engineering, logical and practical. That all changed when my girlfriend Sarah brought her little sister Emma over to my apartment. Emma was 15 and obsessed with horror movies and ghost stories. When she saw the Ouija board on my coffee table, her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Oh my God, Jake, we have to try this," she squealed. Sarah rolled her eyes but agreed to play along. "Just for fun," she said. We dimmed the lights and sat around my small dining table. The board looked innocent enough, just cardboard with letters and numbers printed on it. The planchette was plastic, lightweight, nothing threatening about it. I placed my fingers on it along with the girls, feeling slightly ridiculous. "Is anyone there?" Emma asked in a whisper. Nothing happened for several minutes. Then, slowly, the planchette began to move. It slid across the board, and I was sure one of the girls was pushing it. But when I looked at their faces, they seemed genuinely surprised. The board spelled out, "Yes." "What's your name?" Sarah asked, playing along. The planchette moved again, faster this time. The board spelled out, "Marcus." Emma giggled nervously. "How did you die, Marcus?" The response came immediately, "Murdered." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. My apartment didn't have air conditioning issues. I'd never experienced anything like this. "Who murdered you?" I found myself asking, despite my rational mind screaming at me to stop. The planchette jerked violently across the board. The board spelled out, "My brother with an axe." Sarah tried to lift her hands, but they seemed stuck to the planchette. "I can't move my fingers," she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Emma's eyes were wide with terror. "Neither can I." I tried to pull my hands away, but it felt like they were glued to the plastic. The planchette continued moving on its own, spelling out message after message. "He buried me in the basement. I want revenge. I need a body." That's when the lights went out completely. In the darkness, we could hear footsteps above us, heavy, deliberate steps pacing back and forth. But I lived on the 3rd floor. There was no apartment above mine, just the roof. The planchette was moving so fast now that it was dragging our hands with it. The board spelled out, "Look behind you." None of us wanted to turn around, but we couldn't help ourselves. In the window behind us, illuminated by the streetlight outside, stood the silhouette of a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and he was holding what looked like an axe. Emma screamed, and suddenly we could move our hands again. We all jumped up from the table, but the figure in the window didn't disappear. Instead, it raised the axe and brought it down against the glass. The window exploded inward, sending shards everywhere, but there was no one there. No person, no axe, nothing, just broken glass and the cold night air rushing in. We ran out of the apartment and didn't come back until the next morning. When we did, we found something that made my blood run cold. Carved into my dining room table, right where the Ouija board had been, were deep gouges that spelled out a message, "I'm free now." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 days later when I saw the news. A man named David Chen had been arrested for the murder of his brother Marcus Chen. The police had found Marcus's body buried in David's basement after receiving an anonymous tip. Marcus had been killed with an axe. The murder had happened 20 years ago, and the case had been cold ever since. The anonymous tip had come from my phone number, but I never made that call. The police said the voice on the recording was a man's voice, deep and raspy, saying only, "Check David Chen's basement for Marcus." I threw the Ouija board away that same day, but I don't think it mattered. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear those heavy footsteps above my apartment, and sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see Marcus standing behind me, nodding his approval. I helped him get his revenge, and now I think he's decided to stick around. The worst part is I'm starting to like having him here.
I still can't touch a Ouija board without my hands shaking. People think I'm being dramatic, but they weren't there that night when Sarah's basement became something else entirely. They didn't see what crawled out of the alphabet. It started as a stupid sleepover game. Sarah had found her grandmother's old board tucked away in a dusty corner of the basement, wrapped in black velvet like some precious relic. The thing looked ancient, with letters carved deep into dark wood that seemed to absorb the light from our phones. Maya thought it was cool. I thought it looked hungry. "Come on, don't be such a baby," Sarah laughed, setting up candles around us in a circle. "It's just a game." But when we placed our fingers on the planchette, the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. The basement felt wrong, like we were being watched by something that had been waiting a very long time for visitors. The planchette started moving immediately. Not the gentle gliding you see in movies, but sharp, violent jerks that made our hands cramp. The board spelled out "Welcome home" over and over, faster each time, until our fingers were burning from trying to keep up. "Who are you?" Maya whispered, and I wished she hadn't asked. The planchette shot to the letters so hard it nearly flew off the board. "The girl in the walls." Sarah went pale. My grandmother told me stories about a girl who used to live here. She disappeared in the 1960s. They never found her body. That's when the scratching started. Soft at first, like mice in the walls, then louder, deeper, like fingernails dragging across wood from the inside. The sound seemed to follow the board's messages, growing more frantic with each word it spelled. "Where is my mother?" appeared on the board, and the scratching became pounding. Dust rained from the ceiling as something hammered against the walls from within. We should have stopped. We should have run. Instead, Maya kept asking questions, her voice shaking but determined. "What happened to you?" The planchette moved so violently it cut Sarah's finger. Blood dripped onto the board, and I swear the wood absorbed it like a sponge. The basement lights flickered as the board spelled out, "He put me here, in the cement, still alive." That's when we heard the crying. A child's voice, muffled and distant, coming from behind the basement walls. Sarah's face went ghost white. "The foundation," she whispered. "Grandma said they poured new concrete in the basement right after the girl disappeared." The crying grew louder, more desperate, and the board wouldn't stop moving. 30 years in the dark. So hungry. So angry. The candles started going out one by one, but the planchette kept moving in the darkness, T-slit, spelling out words we could feel through our fingertips. "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out." Then Maya screamed. Something was wrong with the wall behind her. The concrete was bulging outward, cracking in spiderweb patterns. Water seeped through the cracks, dark and thick and smelling like death. The crying was right there now, right behind the wall, and I realized it wasn't water coming through those cracks. The planchette spelled out one final message: "She's coming through." The wall exploded. I don't remember much after that. Just running, screaming, the feeling of something cold and wet grabbing at my ankles as we raced up the basement stairs. Sarah slammed the door, and we never went back down. The next day, Sarah's parents found a hole in the basement wall. Behind it was a small space, just big enough for a child. They found clothes, toys, and bones that the police later identified as belonging to Jennifer Mills, the girl who vanished in 1967. But here's what keeps me awake at night. They never found all the bones. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can still feel that board spelling out messages under my fingertips. Still hear that desperate, angry voice asking the same question over and over. Why didn't you let me finish? Because whatever came through that wall that night I don't think it was Jennifer Mills. I think it was something else entirely, something that had been waiting in that dark space for decades, feeding on her bones and her pain and her rage, something that used our Ouija board like a doorway. And I think it followed us home.
I should have listened when my grandmother warned me never to touch her Ouija board. But curiosity killed more than just cats that night in October 2019. I was 19 then, home from college for fall break, and the old Victorian house felt different somehow. Emptier, colder. 3 weeks had passed since we buried Grandma Rose, and I was alone in the house, sorting through her belongings when I found it hidden beneath dusty photo albums in her bedroom closet. The board was ancient, its wooden surface worn smooth by decades of use, with ornate letters that seemed to shimmer in the lamplight. A folded piece of paper was taped to the back with my name written in her shaky handwriting. For Marcus, but only if you're brave enough to hear the truth. I wasn't brave. I was stupid. I set up the board on her antique dining table that same night, lighting candles like I'd seen in movies. My fingers trembled as I placed them on the planchette, and I whispered into the darkness, "Grandma Rose, are you there?" The candle flames flickered, and the planchette began to move immediately, spelling out, "Marcus, listen carefully." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I pressed on. "Grandma, is that really you?" The response chilled me to the bone. "Not your grandmother. She cannot hear you now." I tried to lift my hands, but they wouldn't budge from the planchette. Something held them there with invisible force. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. The board spelled out, "The one she kept away for 60 years. The temperature in the room plummeted and my breath came out in visible puffs. The entity continued, "Rose made a bargain. Her life for your protection. Now she is gone." I finally understood why Grandma Rose had aged so rapidly in her final years, why she'd grown paranoid about keeping doors locked and windows blessed with salt. She'd been holding something back, something that wanted me. "What do you want?" I whispered. "What she promised me, her bloodline, you." The planchette moved faster now, scraping across the board with violent intensity. She thought death would end our deal. She was wrong. Every light in the house suddenly went out, leaving only the dancing candle flames. In their wavering glow, I saw something forming in the corner of the room, a shadow that moved independently of any light source, growing taller and more solid with each passing second. The board continued, "Look behind you, Marcus." I refused to turn around, but I could feel its presence growing stronger, could smell something like sulfur and decay filling the air. The entity pressed harder. She used this board to speak with me for 60 years. Every week she would ask for more time, more life, always promising me you when you came of age. My hands were still frozen to the planchette as it spelled out, "Tonight you take her place." The shadow behind me whispered my name in a voice like grinding glass, and I felt cold fingers brush against the back of my neck. Desperation gave me strength, and I finally ripped my hands free from the board, sending the planchette flying across the room. I grabbed the candles and hurled them at the shadow, which shrieked and recoiled as wax and flames scattered across the floor. The house erupted in inhuman screams as I ran for the front door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. Every door and window in the same, trapping me inside with whatever my grandmother had been feeding for 6 decades. I could hear it moving through the house now, searching room by room, calling my name in that horrible voice. That's when I remembered Grandma Rose's final words in the hospital. "The salt, Marcus. Remember the salt." I sprinted to the kitchen and found the container of blessed salt she'd always kept by the window. The entity's footsteps thundered up the stairs as I poured salt in a circle around myself, whispering every prayer I could remember. The thing found me there in the kitchen, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. A writhing mass of shadow and bone, with eyes like burning coals and teeth that gleamed like broken glass. It lunged at my salt circle, but recoiled as if struck, howling in frustration. We stared at each other until dawn broke through the windows, and the entity began to fade. "This is not over," it hissed. "The salt will not protect you forever. I will wait. I will watch, and when your guard drops, I will collect what is owed." The creature vanished with the rising sun, but its words proved true. That was 3 years ago, and I still carry salt in my pockets everywhere I go. I've never spent a single night without a salt circle around my bed, because sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, I can still hear that grinding glass voice calling my name, and I know my grandmother's deal is far from finished.
I should have thrown that board in the fire the moment I found it in my grandmother's attic, but something about the way it seemed to whisper my name in the dusty silence made me carry it downstairs instead. 3 weeks later, I'm writing this with hands that won't stop shaking, hoping someone will believe what happened to me and my friends that night. It was Marcus who suggested we try the Ouija board during our weekend camping trip. We'd driven up to Pine Lake, the same spot where we'd been going since high school, but this time felt different. Maybe it was because we were all turning 21 soon, or maybe it was the strange fog that had rolled in just after sunset, but the familiar campsite felt heavy with something I couldn't name. "Come on, Riley," Marcus said, his dark eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Your grandmother was into all that spiritual stuff. This thing probably has some serious mojo." He ran his tattooed fingers along the board's worn edges, and I swear the temperature dropped 5 degrees. Sarah laughed nervously, tucking a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear. "I don't know, guys. My mom always said those things invite bad energy." But even as she protested, she was already sitting cross-legged on the ground, her pale hands hovering over the planchette. Damien said nothing, just watched us with those intense gray eyes of his, but I could see the curiosity written across his angular face. He'd always been the skeptic of our group, the one who needed proof before he'd believe anything. We placed our fingers on the planchette just as the fire began to die down. The plastic felt ice cold under my fingertips, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then Marcus asked the question that changed everything. "Is anyone there?" The planchette jerked so violently that Sarah gasped and nearly pulled her hands away. It slid across the board with purpose, spelling out a single word that made my blood freeze. "Waiting." "Who's moving it?" Damien demanded. But we all knew none of us were pushing the planchette. It moved with a force that seemed to pull our hands along, like we were passengers on a ride we couldn't control. "What have you been waiting for?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the crackling embers. The response came faster this time. Her to come home. My grandmother had died in this area 40 years ago, in a car accident on the winding road that led to the lake. She'd been coming back from a camping trip with her friends, just like we were. The coincidence made my skin crawl. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The board spelled out Margaret, and I felt the world tilt sideways. That was my grandmother's name. But then the planchette began moving again, more aggressively now, and the message it spelled made no sense. Not alone, they followed me back. The fire suddenly flared back to life, without any of us touching it, casting wild shadows that seemed to dance independently of the flames. In those shadows, I saw shapes that looked almost human, but wrong somehow, like people viewed through broken glass. "We need to say goodbye," I said urgently. "We have to close the session properly." But the planchette was moving on its own now, our fingers barely touching it as it raced across the board. "Too late. Door is open. They're hungry." That's when we heard the whispers coming from the tree line around our campsite. Dozens of voices, all speaking at once, in words I couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably malevolent. Damien jumped to his feet, grabbing a flashlight, but when he shined it toward the trees, the whispers stopped. In the sudden silence, we heard something worse. Footsteps circling our campsite, slow and deliberate, like whatever was out there was taking its time. "Goodbye," I shouted at the board, but the planchette wouldn't move to the goodbye corner. Instead, it spelled out one final message that still haunts my dreams. "Coming with you." We packed up our campsite in record time, throwing everything into our cars as the footsteps grew closer. But as we drove away, I saw something in my rearview mirror that made me floor the accelerator. Dark figures were standing in the road behind us, and they were following our taillights with their eyes. That was 3 days ago. Since then, each of us has been experiencing things we can't explain. Marcus found muddy footprints leading to his bedroom window. Sarah keeps hearing her name whispered in empty rooms. Damien's electronics turn on by themselves, always at exactly 3:17 a.m. And me? I wake up every morning to find that Ouija board sitting on my kitchen table, no matter where I hide it or how many times I try to throw it away. Last night, I found a message spelled out in the dust on my bathroom mirror. Missed you. I'm writing this as a warning to anyone who might find this story. Some doors should never be opened, and some invitations should never be extended. We thought we were just playing a game, but we ended up inviting something ancient and hungry into our world. The worst part? I think it's just getting started.
I swore I'd never touch another Ouija board after what happened in my basement 3 years ago. But here I am, writing this down because the dreams won't stop, and my therapist says confronting the memory might help. She's wrong, but maybe someone else will read this and make a smarter choice than I did. The board is still down there, by the way, exactly where we left it that night, because I'm too terrified to go back and move it. It started as a joke during my 19th birthday party. My girlfriend Rachel had brought her grandmother's antique Ouija board, this beautiful wooden thing with intricate carvings around the edges and letters that seemed to shimmer in the dim basement light. Rachel was this petite girl with short black hair and the most infectious laugh, always trying to get everyone to do something crazy. My buddy Marcus, this tall guy who lifted weights religiously and never backed down from a dare, immediately called it stupid kid stuff. But Sarah, my quiet friend with the wire-rimmed glasses and nervous habit of tucking her red hair behind her ears, seemed genuinely curious about it. We'd been drinking, celebrating my birthday and the fact that my parents were out of town for the weekend. The basement felt perfect for it, all shadows and corners where the lamplight couldn't quite reach. Rachel insisted we follow all the rules she'd learned from her grandmother, lighting candles and turning off the electric lights. We sat in a circle on the cold concrete floor, our fingers barely touching the planchette. At first, nothing happened. Marcus kept making jokes about how we were all pushing it, and I was starting to agree with him. Then the planchette began moving, slowly at first, spelling out simple words. The board spelled out hello, and then David, when we asked who was there. We figured someone was messing around, but everyone swore they weren't pushing it. That's when things got specific. The board spelled out 19th birthday, without us mentioning my age. Then it spelled out Marcus broke arm age 7, and Marcus went pale, admitting he'd never told any of us about falling off his bike and breaking his arm when he was little. Sarah asked how it could know that, and the planchette immediately moved to spell I watch always. The temperature in the basement dropped so fast we could see our breath. The candles started flickering even though there was no wind down there. Rachel wanted to stop, but I was fascinated and scared in equal measure. Against everyone's better judgment, I asked what it wanted from us. The board spelled out flesh, and the planchette flew off the board, hitting the wall so hard it cracked. That should have been our cue to run, but we were frozen, staring at each other in the candlelight. Then Sarah started screaming. She was pointing behind Marcus, her eyes wide with terror. We turned to see a shadow moving along the basement wall, but not like a normal shadow. This thing had substance, depth, and it was growing larger. The shadow began peeling away from the wall, becoming three-dimensional, reaching toward Marcus with what looked like clawed fingers. Marcus jumped up and the shadow lunged at him. I watched this impossible thing wrap around his arm, and where it touched him, his skin started turning black and withering. He was screaming and trying to pull away, but the shadow held on tight. Rachel grabbed one of the candles and thrust it at the shadow, and the thing recoiled with a sound like wind through dead leaves. We all ran upstairs, dragging Marcus with us. His arm was severely frostbitten where the shadow had touched him, black and dead-looking. We rushed him to the hospital, making up some story about him falling through ice, but the doctors couldn't explain the spiral pattern of the damage or why it looked more like a burn than frostbite. Marcus lost 3 fingers and part of his forearm. The doctors said he was lucky it didn't spread further up his arm. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is what happened to Sarah. 3 days later, she called me crying, saying she kept seeing the shadow in her peripheral vision. She said it was following her, getting closer each day. I thought it was just trauma from what we'd witnessed, but then she sent me a photo of her bathroom mirror. Someone had written "soon" in what looked like frost across the glass. Sarah disappeared a week later. The police found her car by the lake, but they never found her body. Her parents blamed themselves, said she'd been acting strange and paranoid since my birthday party. I wanted to tell them the truth, but who would believe a story about a Ouija board summoning a shadow creature? Rachel broke up with me a month later, said she couldn't handle the guilt of bringing that board to my house. She moved across the country and won't return my calls. I don't blame her. The dream started right after Sarah vanished. Every night, I see that basement, but now there are dozens of shadows moving along the walls. They whisper things in voices I recognize. Sarah's voice mixed with others I don't know. They tell me they're hungry, that they've been waiting, that the board was just a doorway and we left it wide open. I've tried moving away, but the dreams follow me. I've tried therapy, medication, even had a priest bless my apartment, but nothing works. The shadows are getting stronger, more solid in my dreams, and sometimes I wake up with frost on my windows even in summer. Last week I found a message written in condensation on my shower door. Come home. I know what it means. The shadow wants me to go back to that basement, back to the board. Maybe it wants to finish what it started, or maybe it just wants to add my voice to Sarah's in those whispered promises of hunger. I'm writing this as a warning. If you ever find yourself sitting around an old Ouija board, thinking it might be fun to contact the dead, remember my story. Remember Marcus's withered arm and Sarah's empty car by the lake. Remember that some doors should never be opened, because once you let something through, it never stops trying to come back for more. The basement is calling to me now, and I don't think I can resist much longer. The cold in my bones wasn't just the night air or the drip in the IV stand. It was something else, creeping through me, eating me from the inside out. They said 6 months, maybe less. 6 months of watching the sun set and knowing it was one less I had left. That's when the whisper started, just at the edge of my hearing, promising answers, promising more time. It sounded crazy, but what did I have to lose when everything was already gone? I'd found the old Ouija board in a dusty corner of an antique shop, something I never would have looked at before. It was dark wood, worn smooth with age, with symbols I didn't recognize etched around the letters. The shop owner, a woman with eyes that seemed to see too much, just smiled and said, "Some things choose you, not the other way around." I took it home, not really believing, but desperate enough to try anything. The first time I unfolded it on my small, rickety coffee table, the room felt different, heavy, thick. I placed my fingers on the planchette, heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and whispered the question that haunted my waking and sleeping hours. Is there a cure for me? The planchette vibrated, just a little at first, then began to glide. It spelled out yes. My breath hitched. It was just a parlor trick, I told myself. But the hope, a tiny, fragile bird, began to flutter in my chest. Over the next few nights, I kept going back to the board. The spirit, or whatever it was, called itself Professor Elizar. It spoke of ancient remedies, forgotten herbs, and rituals. It seemed to understand my pain, my fear. Professor Elizar promised to lead me to a full recovery, but there was always a cost. First, it asked for my dreams. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. But then my sleep grew shallow, dreamless. I woke up feeling empty, yet I felt a strange flicker of strength returning, a warmth in my chest that hadn't been there in months. It was enough to make me believe. If it asked for my dreams and gave me life, what else would it take? The demands grew. Professor Elizar's messages became more insistent, more chilling. The board spelled out your tears. The next day I couldn't cry. My eyes burned, but no moisture came. My family, they cried for me, but I just watched them, detached. Then came your memories. I held on to them tightly, but moments from my childhood, faces of loved ones, began to blur, then vanish altogether. The fear was a cold hand squeezing my throat, but the physical improvements were undeniable. I walked without pain. My cough was gone, my energy robust. Was this healing, or was I just trading one kind of death for another? The last message from the board made my blood run cold. The planchette moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring each letter. Your soul. I tore my fingers from it, overturning the board and sending it clattering to the floor. Had I made a mistake? Had I traded my very essence for a few more months or years of a life I was quickly forgetting? I looked at my reflection in a darkened window, gaunt, pale skin with prominent veins, dark circles under tired blue eyes, the same Alex, but hollowed out, ghost-like. The scar above my right eyebrow was still there, a constant reminder of who I was. But who was I now, really? I felt the energy, the life brimming in my body, but it felt alien, wrong. A chilling certainty settled in. Professor Eliezer wasn't a healer, it was a collector. And I, in my desperation, had become its prize specimen. Now I walk among them, a picture of health, a miracle, they say. But I can't feel joy or sadness or love. My memories are frayed threads, and my dreams are an empty void. The board is still here, hidden under my bed, vibrating faintly even when I'm not touching it. I see Professor Eliezer in the shadowed corners of my room, a tall, indistinct figure, watching me with unseen eyes. It smiles. I know that smile. It's the smile of a hunter who has caught its prey. I am cured, yes, but I am also truly damned, a vessel living on borrowed time, filled with something that isn't me, waiting for the final, dreadful payment. I traded death for an existence far worse, an empty shell, forever bound to the spirit I foolishly trusted. There is no cure for what I have become. I remember the smell of pine needles and damp earth, the way the campfire smoke stung your eyes. It was supposed to be just another camping trip with my buddies, Kevin, Mark, and Sarah. A few days away from everything, under the stars. We packed the usual stuff, tents, sleeping bags, way too much junk food. But Kevin, being Kevin, had to bring something extra. Something different. He pulled it out of his backpack with a grin that made my stomach knot up right away. It was old, the wood cracked and faded, chipped around the edges like teeth that had seen better days. A Ouija board. No way, man, I said, my voice maybe a little too loud. I'd heard stories. Everyone had. Things you shouldn't mess with. Especially out here, miles from anywhere with nothing but trees and the dark all around. Kevin just laughed, setting it down on a flat rock near the fire. Sarah gave me a look, half annoyed, half curious. Mark just shrugged. He was always up for whatever, good or bad. We ate hot dogs that tasted vaguely of smoke and plastic, and then as the fire crackled and the shadows stretched long, Kevin brought it out again. The planchette was cold and smooth under my fingers as I reluctantly joined them around the board. We put our fingertips on it, just like the instructions said, in the dim glow of our lanterns and the dying fire. The air felt heavy, thick, like something was holding its breath, waiting. Kevin asked the first question, his voice a little shaky despite his bravado. Is anyone there? For a long moment, nothing, just the sound of the wind in the trees, the distant hoot of an owl. Then, slow, like it was moving through thick mud, the planchette started to slide. Not a jump or a shove, just a smooth, slow drag. My skin prickled. Mark's eyes were wide in the lamplight. Sarah let out a small gasp. The board spelled out YES. My heart was pounding against my ribs. We asked more questions. Stupid questions, mostly. Are you friendly? The board spelled out NO. A cold dread started to spread through me. What do you want? This time the planchette moved faster, like it was eager to answer. It spelled out TOPLA. Play? What kind of play? Before we could ask anything else, the wind picked up, not a gentle breeze, but a harsh whipping wind that made the trees groan and sway like they were in pain. The fire spat sparks high into the air, and for a second, I thought I saw something dark and fast flicker at the edge of the campsite. When it died down, the planchette was still, dead on the board. We decided to pack it up. It wasn't funny anymore. The fun was gone, replaced by a real bone-deep fear. We folded the board, put the planchette away, but the feeling didn't go away. It clung to us, cold and heavy. We tried to talk, to laugh, to shake it off, but every little sound in the woods made us jump. A twig snapping, a rustle in the leaves. It all sounded like something was watching us, moving closer. We huddled inside the tent, 4 of us crammed together, pretending to sleep. But nobody was sleeping. Every few minutes, one of us would stiffen, hearing something outside. A soft scraping sound, like claws on bark. A low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me, wishing more than anything that I wasn't there, that I was home, safe in my bed. Suddenly, something hit the side of the tent. Not a branch, it was too solid, too heavy, then another and another, like fists pounding against the thin fabric. We froze, barely breathing. A rip appeared in the tent material, a dark tear like a cruel smile. Through it I saw something dark and impossibly thin snake inside. It was black, like dried blood, and it moved with a jerky, unnatural speed. My throat was dry, silent. Sarah screamed. We scrambled out of the tent, stumbling over each other into the cold night air. The lanterns were flickering, casting wild, jumping shadows. The air was filled with that low whispering sound now, closer, clearer. It wasn't words I could understand, but it felt like pure hate, like a promise of pain. We ran, blindly, tripping over roots and logs. Behind us, the sound followed, gaining on us, faster than anything natural. We could hear branches snapping, heavy feet pounding the ground. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs ached. We didn't look back. We couldn't. Finally, we burst out of the trees and onto the dusty dirt road that led back to civilization. We ran down the road, not stopping until the lights of the nearest town were just visible in the distance. We didn't stop until we were gasping for air, collapsing on the side of the road. We never went back for our gear. We never talked about what we saw. Not really. Not in detail. But the memory, the feeling of that thing chasing us, the way it sounded, it's still with me. Every time I close my eyes in the dark, I hear that whispering, and I wonder what would have happened if it had caught us. What kind of play it wanted. We left the Ouija board there in the woods. I don't know what became of it. Maybe it's still there, waiting for someone else to find it, to ask if anyone is there, and I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that it will answer.
The dust motes danced in the single beam of moonlight cutting through the attic window, each one a tiny ghost in the silence of the old house. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and cold. That's when the sickness started, a feeling deep in my gut that something was incredibly wrong, that we'd opened a door that couldn't be closed. I can still taste the fear, sharp and metallic, like blood in my mouth. We found the board tucked away in an old trunk, beneath moth-eaten blankets and faded photographs. It wasn't the cheap plastic kind, but heavy wood, dark and polished, with letters carved deep into its surface. Jordan picked it up first, grinning, saying it was authentic spooky stuff. Casey, always daring, immediately wanted to try it, her dark eyes glinting with excitement. I was the one who felt a chill, a prickle on my arms, but a part of me, the part that loved a good scare, was pulled in too. This house had a history. Everyone knew that. Tales of unexplained noises, cold spots, things moving on their own. We set the Ouija board on a dusty table, the planchette cool under our fingertips. Our fingers touched lightly, each of us slightly nervous, a nervous energy buzzing between us. We asked if anyone was there. The planchette shuddered, then slowly, unevenly, it glided to yes. Jordan laughed, a little too loud. Casey squealed. My heart hammered against my ribs, convinced it was one of them pushing it. We kept asking questions, silly ones at first. What's your name? The board spelled out Malice. Chills traced my spine, but Jordan just nudged me, whispering that it was probably Casey. Then we asked, what do you want? The planchette moved with more force now, a steady, deliberate glide. It spelled out, enter. A cold breath seemed to wash over me, raising goosebumps on my arms. The light in the attic flickered, then died, plunging us into total darkness. Scared yells broke the silence. Jordan fumbled for his phone, its flashlight beam finally cutting through the black. We packed up the board quickly, the fun gone, replaced by a gnawing dread. We all agreed it was just an old house and a scary story, trying to convince ourselves it wasn't real, but it was real. We drove back to Jordan's place, the silence thick with unspoken fear. The first sign, a mirror cracking in his hallway as we walked past, made us freeze. No one was near it. A hairline fracture spiderwebbed across the glass, right through Jordan's reflection. He stared at it, his tan face pale. Then, as he reached out, his reflection twisted, a wide, unnatural smile stretching its mouth, its eyes black pits. Jordan stumbled back, gasping. I saw it too, just for a second, a flicker of something monstrous in his own image. Casey screamed. Things got worse. We hid in his living room, the lights on full blast. Every reflective surface became a threat. The TV screen, the polished surface of the coffee table, even the black screen of Jordan's phone. Every now and then, for a split second, our reflections would distort. My own face, the small freckle below my eye, would warp, teeth elongating, eyes sinking deep into shadows. It felt like something was trying to claw its way out of the glass, something that looked like us, but wasn't. The smell of decay was back, stronger now, mixed with something like burnt hair. We were trapped in a cage of our own faces. Casey was the first one to really break. She stared into the window pane, her dark eyes wide. Her reflection was doing something unspeakable, mimicking her movements but with a grotesque slowness, its head tilting too far to the side, its mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. Casey started sobbing, pounding on the glass, as if trying to shatter the monstrous image. Her reflection mimicked her, but its movements were slick, distorted, a mockery. That's when the real terror hit me. It wasn't just a reflection, it was a separate thing, an echo that could twist and break the rules of reality, and it was getting stronger because of our fear. I don't know what happened to Casey after that. We heard glass shatter down the hall. Jordan and I ran, but found nothing. The window in the hallway was shattered, fragments sparkling on the floor like evil diamonds. Casey was gone. Jordan and I locked ourselves in the bathroom, the only room with no mirrors. I remember sitting there, huddled against the cold tile, the silence broken only by the drip of the faucet and our ragged breathing. The fear was a living thing, crawling under my skin. Then I saw it. The polished chrome of the tap, just a tiny sliver, reflected my eye, and in it, my reflection winked. My actual reflection. It was just a wink, but it was enough. I knew it was still here, still watching, waiting. Sometimes when I pass a window or catch a glimpse of myself in a dark screen, I still feel that cold dread, that knowing, that one day, the real me will be looking back from the other side, and a twisted version of me will be looking back from this. The quiet of the house was a scream I couldn't silence. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a hammer blow to my heart, a painful reminder of the laughter that no longer echoed through these rooms. It had been 7 months since the car accident, 7 months since I lost my daughter Lily. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, haunted by her smile, her voice, by the finality of it all. People told me to move on, to find closure, but how do you close a wound that ripped out your very soul? That's when the idea, a desperate, foolish whisper, started to grow in my mind. The Ouija board. I'd seen them in old movies, in dusty antique shops, always dismissed them as a silly game. But what if? What if there was a way, just one last chance, to hear her voice again? I needed to try. I drove to a small shop on the edge of town, the kind with dim lights and the scent of old books and dust. The board was in a glass case, its wood dark and shiny, the letters perfect. It felt cold under my trembling fingers. The shop owner, a thin man with tired eyes, just nodded when I bought it, as if he understood the kind of despair that leads someone to such a thing. That night, alone in Lily's old room, surrounded by her toys and the lingering scent of lavender, I unwrapped the board. The planchette, smooth and cool, felt strangely heavy in my hand. I placed my fingertips on it, my breath catching in my throat. "Lily?" I whispered into the silent room, my voice cracking. "Are you here, my darling?" My arm felt a strange pull, a subtle resistance, then a slow, almost gentle glide. The board spelled out Evelyn, my name. Tears welled in my eyes. It wasn't Lily's name, but it was a sign, a connection. This was real. A tiny spark of hope, fragile but fierce, ignited in my chest. I kept asking, my questions tumbling out, desperate for any comfort. The planchette moved again, slow and deliberate. It spelled out MISSYOUMOMMI. My heart stopped. It was her. It had to be her. I started to cry, a flood of silent tears, relief and sorrow mixing into a dizzying wave. I missed her so much. I asked if she was okay, if she was happy wherever she was. The board spelled out HURT. My stomach clenched. What did that mean? Was she trapped? Was she suffering? A cold dread began to creep in, chilling me despite the rush of tears on my cheeks. Before I could ask more, the planchette moved rapidly, almost violently, spelling out LOKCLOSC. I pulled my hand away, my heart pounding. Look close at what? The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, thick. I looked around, my eyes darting over Lily's familiar room, the pink walls, the unicorn plushie on her bed, the drawings taped to the dresser. Nothing seemed out of place. But then I saw it. On a small, framed photo of Lily and me, taken last summer at the beach, her face was slightly blurred. Her eyes in the picture were entirely black. They looked like deep, empty holes staring out at me. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I almost gagged. I dropped the planchette. I scrambled backward, hitting the wall, my gaze fixed on the photo. It had been fine yesterday. It had been normal. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead. My mind screamed at me that it was a trick of the light, the old frame, anything but what I knew it really was. I forced myself to reach out, to pick up the photo. As my fingers touched the glass, the faint scent of something metallic, like old blood, filled the air. I let out a choked gasp, dropping the frame onto the floor. The glass shattered, and one of the black eyes seemed to wink at me from the broken pieces. I was shaking, truly shaking now. I stumbled back to the board, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. My fingers, still trembling, found the smooth surface of the planchette. What was that? I asked, my voice a barely audible whisper. The planchette moved, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. It spelled out SHEISTRAPE die inside died. The words hung in the air, thick and menacing. My Lily, trapped? Inside what? My own thoughts? The board? The bat room felt impossibly cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. A low, raspy whisper, not from the board but seemingly from the air around me, echoed in the room. It was faint, distorted, but I recognized it. Lily's voice, whispering, "Mommy, help me." The sound paralyzed me. It was her, but wrong, twisted. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my own breath fogging in the air. That same distorted whisper came again, louder this time. "Let me out." It was her voice, but the word "me" was elongated, distorted, like a growl. A strong, putrid smell filled the room, like something decaying in stagnant water. The planchette, of its own accord, began to spin wildly on the board, a black blur across the letters. My fingers were glued to it, no matter how hard I tried to pull away. It was a terrifying dance, faster and faster, until the room seemed to spin with it. Then, with a sudden, painful jolt, the board flew up, hitting the ceiling with a loud crack before crashing back down onto Lily's bed, splintering into pieces. A chilling laugh, deep and guttural, filled the room. It was not Lily's laugh. It was ancient, evil. The room went dark, utterly dark, as if the light itself had been swallowed. I screamed, but no sound came out. My throat was raw. A sharp, burning pain shot through my left arm. I stumbled backward, still blind, my hand going to my arm. My fingers met a cool, slick liquid. I knew instinctively what it was. Blood. It wasn't a splinter, it was a cut, a deep one, as if a razor had sliced through my skin. I could hear a faint, wet, dragging noise as if something heavy and wet was being pulled across the floor in the pitch black. The sound got closer. I could feel a cold, decaying breath on my neck. That twisted, distorted whisper, right in my ear, said, "You opened the door, Evelyn. Now she's mine." My mind shattered. I collapsed onto the floor, the darkness consuming me, the chilling whisper still echoing in my head. I wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. I had brought this into my home, and it wasn't letting go. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me completely was my daughter's sweet voice, but it was coming from inside me. It was not her. It was something else, and it was laughing. Again, that terrible ancient laugh. I remember the day it started. It was a scorching summer afternoon, the kind where the air shimmered above the asphalt and the world felt too heavy to move. Mommy and Daddy were arguing again downstairs, their voices muffled but their anger seeping up through the floorboards. I was 10, and I just wanted to disappear. So I did what I always did. I crawled into the attic, a forgotten space filled with dust motes dancing in the sunbeams and the quiet whispers of old things. That's where I found it. Hidden under an old blanket, tucked away in a trunk filled with musty clothes, lay a flat, wooden board. It was dark, almost black, with letters and numbers painted in a strange, swirly font. In the middle, a small, heart-shaped piece of wood with a clear window in it, a planchette, rested waiting. It wasn't a toy, not really, but I didn't know what it was. It felt important, heavy. I dusted it off, carefully tracing the letters with my finger. It looked like a game, a secret alphabet waiting to be unlocked. I took it down to my room, placing it gently on my rug. I didn't tell Mommy or Daddy. It was my secret, something just for me when the world grew too loud. The first time, I just pushed the planchette around, making up words. It felt silly, like talking to myself. But then, on the third day, something shifted. I asked, "Is anyone there?" My fingers, resting lightly on the planchette, felt a faint pull. It wasn't my doing. It was a gentle nudge, a pressure I hadn't expected. The board spelled out yes. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled my hands away, startled, then slowly, carefully put them back. I asked, "Who are you?" The planchette moved again, slower this time, almost tenderly. The board spelled out, "Friend." A friend. That's what I needed, wasn't it? This friendship became my only comfort. Every day after school, I'd climb into my room, lock the door, and spend hours with my new friend. It was exciting, a hush-hush secret I kept from Brenda and Daniel. The board spelled out kind words, telling me I was smart, special, beautiful. Things I rarely heard. It knew my worries about school, about my parents, about feeling alone. It gave weird advice sometimes, like, don't trust them. I didn't know what them meant, but the voice was so comforting, so clear, that I didn't question it. It was my calm in the storm of our house. It was making me happier, I thought. I stopped wanting to go outside so much, stopped playing with the neighborhood kids. My friend was enough. Brenda noticed, asking why I was spending so much time alone. I just mumbled about homework. Daniel tried to draw me out, suggesting we go fishing. I said I was tired. They looked at me with worried eyes, but I just shrugged. They wouldn't understand. They couldn't be my friend like this board was. Then the messages changed. My friends stopped being kind. The board spelled out, "They hate you." It made me jump. I picked up the planchette, wondering if I'd imagined it. I put it back. "Who hates me?" I asked. The board spelled out Brenda and Daniel. My breath caught in my throat. No, that couldn't be right. They were my parents. They loved me, even when they fought. But the board insisted, "They want to hurt you." It told me to stay in my room, not to eat their food, that they were poisoning me. It got really bossy, telling me not to listen to them, not to trust their lies. One night, the board spelled out, "Lock your door now." I was so scared, I did it. I heard Brenda's gentle knock a few minutes later, asking if I was okay. I didn't answer. I just hugged my knees, staring at the dimly lit Ouija board, my heart thudding. The board's messages became terrifying. It wasn't my friend anymore. It was a voice filled with anger, whispering horrible things. It demanded I do things. Break her favorite vase, it spelled out once, pointing to Brenda's precious glass flower vase that sat on my bedside table. I tried to pull my fingers away from the planchette, but it felt like my hands were glued to it, moving on their own. I couldn't stop it. The vase crashed to the floor, shattering everywhere. Brenda rushed in, saw the mess, and looked at me with such hurt in her eyes. I couldn't explain. I just cried. "It's their fault," the board spelled out, right there on the rug after she left. "They make me do it." The board started to move on its own even when I wasn't touching it, the planchette sliding across the letters, spelling out threats to me, to them. My safe place, my room, felt like a cage. My friend was a monster. I knew I had to get rid of it. I had to make it stop. I grabbed the Ouija board, my hands shaking. I needed to destroy it, to break it into a million pieces. But as I lifted it, I felt a terrible pull, a freezing cold sensation crawl up my arm. The words on the board seemed to glow, morphing, twisting. The planchette lifted, hovering in the air on its own, then zoomed towards my face. The clear window showed nothing, but I felt a breath, cold and stale, on my cheek. It was close, too close. I screamed. I threw the board, and it hit the wall with a sickening thud, splintering into pieces. A black mist, like smoke, poured from the broken wood, swirling and growing. It formed into a shape, tall and thin, with glowing red eyes. It was no longer just a voice on the board. It had a physical form, looming over my small body. The room turned frigid. I tried to scream again, but no sound came out. The thing reached for me, its long, shadowy fingers stretching. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. I woke up in my bed, Brenda stroking my hair. Daniel was beside her, looking panicked. The sun was streaming through my window. It was morning. My room was exactly as it always was. The vase was intact on the table. The Ouija board was gone. There was no broken wood, no black mist, no glowing red eyes. It was all a dream, a terrible nightmare. They just held me close, telling me I was safe. I believe them now. I believe them, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers. Not the board, no. The whispers are in my head now, a soft, insistent voice calling my name, telling me, "You are mine." And I know even the board is gone, the friend I invited in is still here. Something permanent. Something that wanted to be more than just a voice, and it got what it wanted. It started, like most terrible things do, with something small and easily dismissed. A whisper in the dark. A shadow that flickered just outside my sight. My therapist likes to say it was grief, playing tricks on my mind after Buttons died. Buttons was my rabbit, you see, the only creature that ever seemed to truly understand me. He died unexpectedly, found him limp in his cage one morning. The quiet that filled my room after that was a physical thing, heavy and crushing. I was 15, lonely, and desperate. I'd read about Ouija boards online, seen them in movies as corny plot devices. But the articles I found said they could connect you to the beyond, to spirits. Maybe, just maybe, Buttons was still around, waiting for me to find him. It was a stupid, childish hope. I know that now. But when you're 15 and heartbroken, hope, no matter how thin, feels like salvation. I ordered the board online. Plain wood, letters and numbers arranged in a circle, the plastic planchette with a tiny window. It arrived on a Tuesday. I waited until Friday night, until my parents were asleep downstairs, their snores rumbling faintly through the floorboards. I cleared my desk, lit a single plain white candle, and unboxed the board. The wood felt smooth under my fingertips, oddly cold. My hands trembled as I placed the planchette on the board. "Buttons," I whispered into the silent room. "Are you there?" "It's Sarah." Nothing, just the flickering candle flame, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I pushed the planchette gently, trying to believe it was moving on its own, trying to conjure a connection through sheer will. Still nothing. Discouraged, I was about to pack it away when the air in the room seemed to thicken. The candle flame dipped wildly, though there was no breeze. A chill, colder than any I'd felt, seeped into my bones. My breath hitched. I placed my fingers back on the planchette. Is someone here?" I stammered. The planchette glided slowly, smoothly towards yes. My heart hammered against my ribs. Not Buttons, maybe, but something. Fear warred with a thrill I hadn't expected. Curiosity, sharp and dangerous. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. The planchette moved again, faster this time. Darkness. Darkness. Not a name, not really. A description? My hand shook, but I kept it on the planchette. "What do you want?" It paused, a long, drawn-out stillness that felt heavy with anticipation. Then it glided to a single letter. H? H? What did H mean? Help? Home? I racked my brain trying to find meaning. "H?" I asked, feeling foolish talking to a piece of plastic. It moved again. ANDH, and? My mind raced. Was this a game? Where was the rest of the message? Then it moved definitively to the numbers. 5. My skin crawled. Was H and 5 some kind of code? A date? A time? I didn't know. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at my enthusiasm. Are you a good spirit?" I asked, my voice shaking. It flew across the board, straight to no. It lingered there for a moment, as if emphasizing the point. That was it. That was my chance to walk away, to box the board up, throw it in the garbage, pretend it never happened. But the terror was mixed with a strange fascination. And honestly, the sheer novelty of something, anything, breaking through my miserable loneliness was addictive. What if this entity, this darkness, wasn't just some random ghost? Can you help me?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Help me feel less alone. Help me get over Buttons." The words were silent prayers in my head, but I hoped the board understood. The planchette moved again. This time, not to letters or numbers. It went straight to the center of the board, to the small, empty space there. It stopped. It didn't move for a long time. Then, very slowly, it began to trace small, deliberate circles. My eyes widened. It was nodding. It was saying yes, a bargain. The thought popped into my head unbidden. The articles had said it was dangerous. They said you shouldn't ask favors. But what did I have to lose? I had nothing. No friends, no future I could see, just the crushing weight of grief and being invisible. What do you want? I asked. What do you need to help me? The planchette took a long time to respond. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Then it moved. SMALL, small? Small what? I was confused. Small what? I asked. Did it want a small offering? It moved again. FAVOR, small favors. It wanted small favors in return for its help. It sounded simple enough. Easy. A small price to pay for connection, for a sliver of light in the suffocating darkness I'd been living in. Okay, I whispered, sealing my fate with that single word. Okay, I agree. That night, I felt a shift. Nothing dramatic, not at first. The silence in my room didn't feel quite so lonely. It felt occupied, watched, but not in a bad way, more like a silent companion. And the next day at school, something odd happened. Jessica Miller, the girl who'd been relentlessly teasing me about my worn-out clothes and quiet nature, tripped in the hallway, right in front of everyone. It wasn't a spectacular fall, but she twisted her ankle badly and had to be helped to the nurse's office, tears streaming down her face. A small thing, yes. But later, when I was alone in my room, the planchette on the board vibrated gently. A single yes. The favors started small. A classmate forgetting their homework before a big test. My parents being too tired to notice I hadn't eaten dinner. Little insignificant misfortunes for others, unnoticed boons for me. And each time, a faint vibration from the board, a silent confirmation. It wasn't buttons, this entity. It was something else. Something that listened. Something that delivered. And it wanted favors. The favors grew. Not in size, not at first, but in frequency. And they started feeling less like convenient coincidences and more like deliberate actions. Mrs. Luff Davison, my history teacher, the one who always seemed to go out of her way to call me out in class, had a sudden nasty stomach virus and was out for a week. The day before the school play auditions, the lead girl lost her voice completely. Things weren't just happening anymore. They felt orchestrated. The entity on the board, the one that called itself Darkness, didn't speak often. It mostly communicated through the favors and the subtle vibration of the planchette. But sometimes when I asked too many questions about it or about buttons, it would spell out short, chilling sentences. You agreed. It has a price. Don't ask. The favors started to change, too. They weren't just about me getting a little peace or convenience. They started to involve pain, not directly. But I'd ask the board, can you make Mark stop bothering me about that essay? And later that day, Mark would fall down the stairs and sprain his wrist, unable to write. I'd think, I wish Mrs. Henderson would stop giving us so much homework, and her car would get a flat tire on the way to school, making her late and flustered, the homework lesson canceled. My initial relief was quickly replaced by a cold, sinking dread. This wasn't just helping me. This was hurting other people, and it was my fault. I don't like this, I whispered to the board one night, tears stinging my eyes. I don't want these favors anymore. The planchette, which had been still, shot violently across the board. N.O., but you said small favors. I cried, my voice trembling. This isn't small. The planchette moved again, slower, more deliberate this time. They are the price. You agreed. There is no going back. Fear gripped me. I tried to push the planchette away, but it felt stuck, heavy, glued to my fingertips. A low hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to vibrate from inside my own head. The candle flickered wildly, the flame turning a sickly green. The next favor was the worst. I had wished thoughtlessly, angrily, after a particularly humiliating moment in the cafeteria, that the popular girls who laughed at me would just disappear. Not really disappear, of course, just leave me alone. Be gone from my life. The board pulsed with dark energy that night. The next morning there was a news report. A car accident late last night. The 3 girls, all of them, gone. My blood ran cold. My stomach churned. I stumbled to the bathroom and threw up. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. This was too horrible, too directly linked to my angry wish. I stared at the board in my room as if it were a poisonous spider. I wanted to destroy it, burn it, bury it. But the thought of touching it, of even being near it, filled me with paralyzing dread. And the entity, I could feel its presence now, like cold breath on my neck, always watching, always waiting for the next favor. It didn't ask for favors anymore. It just expected them. Based on my thoughts, my frustrations, my wishes, however fleeting. If I thought, I wish I didn't have to take that test, the board would vibrate, and the next day something awful would happen that prevented the test. If I felt a pang of jealousy, someone else would suffer a misfortune that seemed related. I became terrified of my own mind, terrified of thinking anything negative, anything selfish, anything that could be interpreted as a favor by the entity. I started isolating myself, going to school, coming home, locking myself in my room. I barely spoke, afraid my words, even under my breath, would trigger something. Food tasted like ash. Sleep offered no escape, filled with nightmares of the girls in the accident, their faces distorted and blaming. The entity's presence grew stronger. The air in my room was constantly cold. Sometimes I'd see movement out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow that wasn't mine. The planchette would sometimes move on its own, slowly circling the board, a silent, chilling presence in the room. One night, I woke up to a cold weight on my chest. My eyes snapped open in the darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. A pressure, heavy and cold, pushing down on me. I tried to scream, but my throat was tight, no sound coming out. The air I was breathing felt thick, stale. Then I heard a whisper right next to my ear. Not a voice, not really, but a sound that resonated inside my skull, cold and ancient. Favor. It wasn't asking, it was demanding, and the pressure on my chest intensified, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't about hurting others anymore. It was about me. What did it want from me? My energy? My sanity? My very self? I remember that night most clearly. The crushing weight, the cold whisper, the utter helplessness. That was when I knew I hadn't made a bargain for help. I had opened a door to something that didn't just grant wishes, it consumed them. And it was slowly, methodically consuming me, one small, terrible favor at a time. Years later, the cold is still here. The shadows still flicker, and I'm still terrified of thinking, of wishing, because the price my silent companion demands is always, always paid in blood or tears.
The smell of stale coffee and unspoken sadness still clings to my memory, even now. It's been years, but that scent, that room, it's all crystal clear. We were a group of broken people, sitting in a circle, trying to piece ourselves back together. Each of us had lost a part of ourselves, and we met to share that raw, ugly hurt. That's what we called our grief support group. Most nights, it was just talking, quiet tears, and sometimes a shared, sad laugh. Until the Ouija board showed up. Pat, who had lost his wife, was the one who brought it. He seemed desperate, his kind eyes clouded with a new kind of hope. My neighbor swore it helped her, Head mumbled, placing the old ornate board onto the small table in the center of our circle. Jordan, who carried the loss of her younger brother like a heavy cloak, looked at it with a mix of fear and desperate curiosity. I remember how my own hands felt cold, thinking of the friend I had lost, the reason I even joined. We all had our doubts, our fears, but the promise of even a whisper from beyond was a powerful pull. We set our fingertips on the planchette, all 7 of us, a circle of silent prayers and unspoken longing. At first, nothing, just the creak of the old wooden chair, the shared breath in the quiet room. Then, a shudder. The planchette moved, slowly at first, then with a strange, undeniable force. Our eyes widened as it spelled out Danger. A chill ran through us, but the shared feeling of connection, of something actually happening, drowned out the warning. We asked more questions, our grief fueling a reckless desire for answers. The board spelled out, "I am here for you." It was unsettling, but there was a strange comfort in the words, a promise of understanding. Jordan asked about her brother, and the board moved to spell his name, then a message, "He is with me." Pat's face lit up, a fleeting, heartbreaking hope in his eyes. Over the next few weeks, the board became our new, grim therapy. We met more often, drawn by an invisible string. The entity which called itself sympathy seemed to know everything. My friend's last words, Jordan's brother's favorite song, Pat's wife's secret nickname for him. It was unsettlingly accurate, validating our fractured memories, weaving itself deeper into our raw wounds. We ignored the growing sense of unease, the subtle shifts in the room, the air growing colder, shadows seeming to deepen in the corners, whispers that weren't from any of us. We were so caught up in the relief, the feeling of not being alone in our pain, that we didn't see the trap closing around us. One evening, the messages changed. They became demanding, almost possessive. The board spelled out, "Give up your pain." And then, shockingly, "Let me in." Panic set in. Pat tried to pull his hands away, but it was like his fingers were glued to the planchette. Jordan cried out, her blue eyes wide with fear as her arm twisted unnaturally, still held to the board. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine as the entity began to spell out things that were not comforting, but accusatory. "You are weak," it said. "Your grief is mine." The air grew heavy, like an invisible weight pressing down. The faint scent of stale coffee was now mixed with something else, something metallic and sharp, like old blood. The room was not just cold, it was freezing, and our breath plumed out in front of us. Then the real horror began. As someone tried to pull the planchette off the board, it flew across the room, slamming into the wall with a loud crack. The lights flickered wildly, the shadows in the room stretching and dancing like mocking figures. The entity wasn't just talking through the board anymore. It was in the room, a silent, sickening presence that seemed to feed on our fear. We could hear whispering, not from the board, but all around us, in our ears, in our heads. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles pricking our skin. Each whisper was a memory twisted, a loss magnified. It was feeding, growing, making our grief its own weapon. We had opened a door, not just to spirits, but to something that craved our very essence. Our hands were shaking, our faces pale, our eyes darting around the room, seeing nothing, yet feeling everything. We were no longer seeking comfort, we were trapped, and the thing we had welcomed was feasting. We finally understood. This was not about connection or closure, it was about consumption. Sympathy wasn't a friend, it was a parasite. We had to break the connection, starve it of its food, our sorrow. It was the hardest thing to do, to look at the very core of our pain and push back against it. We screamed, we cried, we fought the invisible tendrils wrapping around us. It was a battle not with a visible foe, but with our own despair made manifest. It took everything we had, every ounce of strength we didn't know we possessed, to finally rip ourselves away from the board's influence, to sever the connection, to let go of the very grief that had drawn us to it. The room slowly warmed, the shadows receded, and the whispers died down. The Ouija board lay on the floor, shattered, its friendly message now a mocking echo. We were alive, but forever changed, knowing that sometimes the hardest part of healing is letting go, not just of the loved one, but of the pain that keeps them seemingly near. Some things are better left unspoken, some connections never made. We learned the hard way that true comfort isn't found in a board, but in the quiet, difficult work of moving on, even when it feels like a piece of you is missing. And sometimes what you're holding on to isn't a loved one, but the very thing that wants to take over your life.